Team builder, change catalyst, speaker, facilitator, game enthusiast, humanist, tap dancer. This is Empathy Unbound, Embrace Your Superpower. Our guest today is Alex Suchman. Alex is the CEO and co-founder of Barometer XP, whose mission is to make work a place you actually want to be. She uses games and play to build thriving team cultures and bring genuine meaning and connection to the workplace, something we could all do with more of. I've got a lot of questions, so I want to dive straight into it. So, Alex, thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today. The first thing I wanted to ask you is just to take a little bit step back, really, and understand what helped create the person joining us here today. We've just been talking about your mum is very artistic, and I just wondered what your sort of journey was through the early parts of your life.
Yeah, I think looking back, it was from as early as I can remember this pressure's the wrong way, but very strong encouragement to forge my own path. My mother's an artist. My father was a physician, but very philosophical and creative. And, he was doing yoga and meditation in the 80s before mindfulness was really in the zeitgeist. And as a kid, I was embarrassed. I wanted normal parents who, did normal things and, just really didn't want to stand out. But now as an adult looking back and so totally appreciate not only these examples that they set, but the encouragement that I got from them to anything you find interesting, pursue it, look into it. It doesn't matter if it's something that your friends are doing or that there's a lot of information on, or if, it's sort of quirky. If there's ways that you can engage with the world that are meaningful to you, just do it. And I don't think I realized until I was an adult, how rich that makes your life in both personal and professional context. So I think it really was that go outside of the box, follow your own thing. Things will work out. It makes you more interesting and more curious and makes life a lot more gratifying.
Absolutely. And I think it's funny because it's one of the things that certainly in the UK, our education system doesn't teach us to be brave. Is that the right word? Just to try things. And there's almost this. I was saying to you before we started, my son's 14, my daughter's 17. She's going through her college choices, applications right now and stuff. And they seem to want, but so what are you going to do when you finish college? I haven't started college yet. I'm doing philosophy and psychology, and I don't know where that'll take me, but I'm fascinated by whatever it brings. And I think sometimes an expectation that we should know what we want to do. And I don't think I've ever known what I want to do. And I've just gone where things have taken me. And sometimes that's worked out amazingly. Sometimes I think, shouldn't have done that. But all of it hopefully brought more color and more interest and more energy to the life we have. So it sounds like your parents got that way before most parents did. So that's pretty good. You studied psychology and public policy for your bachelor's and master's, and then you now sort of shifted into games and playing and the workplace. How did the shift take place? How did you move from those topics to where you are today? Or maybe there's a much closer finish than I realized.
A little of both. I've always been interested in human behavior, and that's where the psychology came from. And I thought that I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, but realized I'm too emotional and empathetic of a person and would have burned out within the first year of my
Yeah.
career if I had gone down that path. And that's what led me into public policy was I was in the health and social policy space for about 10 years after I finished my undergrad. And that understanding in human behavior and in psychology is a lot of research methods, and
Yeah.
that really helped me translate into the public policy space where I was working on the same issues, but from a less emotional, more population level. And I truly, truly loved it. I've always been a problem solver. I have naturally been one of the people that friends from really early age have come to with problems, and I love being in that role. Where I noticed my attention shifting about a decade or a little more into my policy career was how dysfunctional the workplace was, and how much that got in the way of people being able to engage with the aspects of work that were most meaningful. And for me, a lot of the problems that were coming up, a lot of things I was hearing people complain about were very preventable. They were recurring, And so that means they were predictable, and that means you can do something about them. And in part, selfishly, because I just wanted people to stop complaining about the same things over and over. It's like, let's just, I'll put a new process in, I'll create a
Mhm.
template, I'll make sure that these two people know each other better so that they don't think the other one is trying to sabotage them. They realize they're just looking at the problem from two different perspectives, and loved that level. It kind of brought back the psychology of how do you make this better environment, better relationships, remove some of these points of friction so that people can do the work that they find so meaningful. And that was part of my shift from actually doing the policy work to looking at how do you make the experience of work better so that people can do what they want.
Mm.
And really love that. And so that I pivoted my career first into operations management and then into organization development to and went out on my own, not just to do the work within the company that I was working, but to be able to help other companies and organizations and teams get rid of some of those unnecessary friction points so they could do the work that they felt really passionate about.
And it's a big change, isn't it? Being a senior manager in operations and organization, and having a company behind you, and having, I assume, a relatively secure role, and then saying, "Yeah, I don't want any of that. I want to wonder where my next client's going to come from. I want to go out on my own." How did you always know you were going to go out on your own? Do you think you were sort of entrepreneur
No,
from early on, or was it not? Okay, it wasn't something in there.
no. And it's funny because I still do like, oh yeah, I own a business, and now Barometer is the second company that I've started. Initially, I felt like if I wanted to do the work that I really loved, which was what I loved about operations organization development, is you have to think across all aspects of an organization. You have to understand the finance side and the people side and the customer service side, and make sure all of those are talking to each other and connecting the way that they should.
Mhm.
Um, but in order to do that, there's endless opportunities for there to be improvements. There's endless pain points that can come in. And so when I was doing that in house, I had way too much on my plate, like too many tentacles and too many things. And uh, I think because I could see the systems level, um, why things were happening and what was coming down, um, people took that for granted and just put way too much on my plate, and I burned out. And so when I left that job, it wasn't because I knew what I wanted to do after. It was just that I felt like I was a shell of myself. I'd been measuring my own personal success and worth based on these external indicators that and realized I was profoundly unhappy and those were not what was meaningful to me. Um, and so it took 6 months to do some soul searching and realized I wanted to do that work, but if I was in house in permanently within any organization, my default would probably be within a few years to get back to that same position where I just had too much and felt like I was being taken for granted, and felt like if I went out on my own and was taking on, whether it was working with a client for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, that was the only way I could do that work that I really loved while protecting my own mental health and then sort of work life balance. And still to this day, I don't love the business development aspect. I don't love um, the bookkeeping. There's so many aspects of having a business that I'm like, why
Yeah,
am I doing this? But it's to be able to focus on the work that I love, but be able to do it on my terms.
that's what everybody dreams of, I guess. Yeah, it's funny. Isn't it? A lot of people see work as something they shouldn't necessarily enjoy. It's just work. It's just what it is, and I think that's so sad. I think being able to enjoy, love, and like I say, there's always parts of whatever we do that we're not going to love. But if the majority of the time it's something that you feel positive about and you know you're in the right place, I think it's really important. I mean, so the sort of 6 months after you left the sort of corporate world before you came to where you are today, was there 6 months? Was that just about spending time understanding yourself better, understanding what did bring you satisfaction, happiness? How did you spend those 6 months?
Um, The first couple months was really like when I left, I was in a big major depressive episode and just felt totally depleted. Um, in a not really fun coincidence, uh, I left the end of October in 2016, and so the week after I left was the 2016 election, which was a very shocking and destabilizing time. So it
Yeah.
took me a couple months to understand the world. Um, but it's a lot of exercising and figuring out what were things in my life that had made me happy and how do I reincorporate them. I always was a dancer growing up and
Mm.
started doing dance class again and rediscovering that side of myself. And being able to spend more time with my husband and people that I loved, um, and sort of get to know like who's baseline me when my job isn't my number one identifier. I live in Washington, D.C., which is a very type A personality people where your job
Yeah.
is so central to your identity, which in some ways is great, but there's a big downside to it. And so I just felt like, who is Alex and what's most important when a job is not at the center of that? And once I started to understand that, then I could start to say, okay, now how do I reestablish my professional self, but in a way that's gonna not be at the expense of my personal self.
Mm. I think we have a very, very similar um, journey. I think I had something very similar, and I got to a point where my job defined me, and I thought my value was my job, how good I was at my job or not, and I really loved it. But I think it just became more and more consuming of time, and more time in evenings and Saturdays and Sundays, and just becoming to think that, well, that's normal now, not paying the attention I should have done to my partner, my wife, my children, my parents, etc. And I think it takes something to sort of shock you out of it almost. And I had I sort of went to see a sort of therapist for sort of 6 months to try and talk it through and things. And I just think having that sort of safe space to talk, really, it's not necessarily they had any answers, because you knew the answers, I knew the answers. It's just feeling, okay, I can verbalize this, and realizing actually no, those things that I thought made me happy, they did, but there's a cost return sort of ratio. Does the cost that outweigh the return you're going to get? So I did the same sort of thing, pivoted, and I feel very different now.
Yeah.
I
Therapy was a big part of those 6 months for me as well, for sure.
Yeah, and it's something we don't necessarily. It's not as common in the UK, I don't think, and you're never quite sure what it is you're going to get. And almost my I'm sure my therapist loved me when I first went to see her. So I said, right, so can you fix me? And it's like, okay, well, let's take a few steps back, and let's just have a conversation. And okay, so I'm just talking to you, and and lots of the things that you don't necessarily recognize as connecting to get you to where you were just helps pull us together, really. And I think it's a bit like if we have a house, we'll decorate it every now and then. If we have a car, we get a service. But we have this incredible thing in our heads, this brain, that we don't think of just
Hmm.
keeping it tuned, keeping it charged, keeping it going, until we get to this point where something happens. Oh, I better go and try and get fixed now. Which is, yeah, it's amazing how little investment we sometimes put in ourselves.
Yeah.
People, certainly not me, people spend hours and hours at the gym and want to look incredible, but actually, yeah, if you don't think well, if you don't look after who you are, which is the very spirit of who you are, then you're never going to be complete or happy or comfortable
Yeah.
or all of those things.
Yeah. And I think a huge challenge that we're facing in, now sort of well into the 21st century is our obsession with the idea that everything can be simplified. I think technology is a huge part of this, is you can just make everything simple and transactional, and it's just like do a few clicks here and you get a therapy plan, or do a few clicks here and it plans out,
Yeah,
when life is more nuanced. Like we live in a really complicated world in both our professional lives and our personal lives individually and as groups we're part of. We want there to be this very quick, very obvious, objective answer to all of our questions.
Hmm.
And a lot of technology gives us the illusion that that's possible. But really, it's only addressing symptoms of broader underlying problems. And the more you ignore that there's a lot going on under the surface that has to be addressed, the more lonely and disconnected and disoriented people feel. And a lot of the work that I do now with Barometer is you can't just have everybody automatically like each other and understand each other and not put any work into it. We're all quirky, nuanced, fully developed people, that and that diversity is such a controversial word right now, but diversity in the sense that we have different hobbies, we have different educational backgrounds, we grew up in different places,
Mhm.
we read different types of books. What makes each one of us is different from everybody else. And in order to leverage that for good, you have to put effort into it. You have to be willing to listen to other people. You have to be willing to consider other perspectives. You have to recognize that you're not the smartest person in the room. Everybody brings something in, and you're better off when you can combine that. And a lot of the things that scare me about use of AI is stripping out that creative, generative human nuance, because by definition, AI only takes information that already exists.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a saying, and I wish I knew who said it, but and the saying goes, "Technology is the answer." Now, what's the question? And I think we get to the same place. AI is the answer. What's the question? Because
A solution to how somebody else defined a problem, but not
yeah, because
necessarily.
we absolutely, and I know this is a human temptation, I guess. We really, really, really want to get to the answer, and we spend so little time actually figuring out what is the actual question,
Yeah.
because that and it's not we know what the question is. We're trying to get our business to be better. We're trying to make more money. That isn't the question, really, is it? And I'm sure you have it, but people get frustrated where you're not immediately coming to the answer, because the more we can understand about the question, the more we can frame the question, the better the answer is going to be. Because I mean, a great example, I
Hmm.
guess, would be 2016, now 2024. We've had two elections where you think in 2024, with all the AI we have now, that the result would have been known to the 0.0001% accuracy prediction. And it wasn't, once again, because people are individual and think differently. I mean, no matter how we might expect them to think, or how we might think their rational brain might work, it's not. The emotion, our emotional intelligence, is such a powerful yet still understood part of who we are. So trying to predict how 180 million people are going to do something spread across thousands of miles of country, it's impossible. And I don't know why people ever thought it wouldn't be, but yeah. I did want to dive in, and I had a good look at the website, which I think is a really good website, actually. But could you explain simply, or not, what does Barometer XP do, and how does it differ from other companies that talk about improving the workplace or improving how people operate?
Yes. So our mission is to make the experience of work, the day to day, you're doing your tasks, you're in your meetings, to put it very crudely, suck less for people, to remove a lot of those points. I think there's too much emphasis on, like, let's make things amazing, and not enough emphasis on what are some tedious frustrations that don't need to be there, that with a little or a lot of effort could be gone.
Hmm.
And the area that we focus on are interpersonal dynamics. So how can you make it so you don't go to work and feel like everybody you work with is out to get you, or don't listen to each other, getting in each other's way. You all feel like we're part of the same thing. We all want to succeed in this particular way. We just bring different lenses to how to do that, and let's work together to harness that. So make that the sort of default, most basic element of culture. And we do that through games and play, because those are shared experiences. And any game, any activity, there's some type of objective. You're doing something for a purpose, and everybody's going to bring their own talents and ideas and biases and background to that situation. And so the games become like a controlled experiment to just focus on how people show up and how they communicate and how they need to be understood and what they bring to the table, what their blind spots are. And so using these shared playful experiences to open up more curiosity and creativity and empathy and shared accountability towards the collaborative work. And often, how we set it up is we isolate particular types of dynamics. So maybe it's a decision making, or maybe it's clarity in giving instructions or expectations. So we're setting up the challenge within the game to mirror the challenge that the group is having at work. So it becomes a way to practice and work through
Mhm.
something, but without the need for particular subject matter expertise or the power dynamics that are inherent in people's positions. So it's games as an experiential learning tool.
And when clients meet you, or prospective clients meet you, they've read about Sink to Swim, they've read about Swim to Sail. These are two programs that people should have a look at. And I know there's obviously a lot of bespoke work you do, but do they get the idea of what play brings to the equation, or do you have to sort of lead them through it?
A little bit of both.
Mhm.
We realized early on, I don't know if this is the same in the UK, but in the States, there's still this like work is really serious and play
Yeah.
is frivolous, and the two can't interact at all. And we decided pretty early on that we're not trying to change the minds of the people that don't see the value in play. Right now, we're trying to attract the people that will lean into that and see the
Mhm.
value of not having to be 100%. I don't want to say serious because the play is really serious, but where there's no room for joy and human connection at work. So the people who come to us and are attracted to what we do are already curious about that
Yeah.
and see that leveraging human potential is not only going to make work more meaningful for people. It's not only the right thing to do for people, but it's going to get the best outcomes at the organizational level. You're going to have, I don't like the word productivity, but you're going to have higher productivity and higher retention and all of those metrics. So when they come to us, they're looking for an outside the box and different experience to get those results. Usually because they've gone with more traditional methods and
Yeah.
haven't seen the results that they are hoping for or were promised.
It's funny, isn't it? We seem to be coming into a phase of the sort of work life experience where we're coming to respect the importance of relationships more and more. And the reason I say that is when I first started work, 100 years ago, I remember one of my bosses at the time saying to me, "You don't come to work to make friends. Like work is a place you come to work, and it's competitive, and you know if you're going to succeed, somebody else has got to fail. All of those terrible greed is good type things." But I think more and more we realise that for most people who work in an office environment, it's 8 hours a day in office, working around people. Why would you want to spend like 40 hours a week with people you don't have an affinity with? And it's not necessarily saying you're going to be best friends out of work. Absolutely not. But as a manager, as a leader, as an individual, being able to understand something about individuals, people that might be um, 30 years younger than you, people that might have grown up in a small town in the middle of nowhere and you were born in the middle of New York, somebody that's got 4 master's degrees from Harvard or whatever versus somebody that's just finished high school. You're all hopefully working towards the same goal, but how do you get to a place where everybody feels that they are contributing to that goal? And I think that's quite hard. I think there's because a lot of people throughout a business, whether it's from the receptionist to the people that keep their laptops working, to the cleaners, to the CEO, you are all contributing towards the end goal of the business. But a lot of people might, what I do, it's not important to what the business does. But without that person, things aren't going to work. So I think that's the big thing. But how do you get people to value their own contribution and then get other people to value the contribution of others?
Hmm. Yeah, and the first step, and really this is where we always start with play, is you have to, people aren't going to change unless they see there's a reason to and they're bought into the idea of it.
Yeah.
And so you have to cultivate this self-awareness and situational awareness for people to see, oh wow, the way that I show up, my default uh, might be making things more difficult for other people, or might
Mhm.
actually be getting in my way of reaching my goals. And once people see that, then they kind of get excited for these ideas of what they can do differently and to immediately see what the impact is going to be.
Mm.
That's why I think a lot of training and development doesn't work, is because like at this time on this day you have to either be in front of the screen or be in this room and someone's going to show you videos or PowerPoints and lecture, and by the end you're going to change your behavior. 100% that's not how the human brain works. Guaranteed. So how do you get people into that? How do you prime them to be looking for what are these opportunities where either the way that you show up in an active way or in a passive way
Mm.
can change the outcome, and
Mhm.
then be more attuned to how other people are showing up. And so, let's say you and I work together, we're often butting heads, but in the context of a game, when we're in this curious mindset, I realize, oh, you really need to have the details. And so when you ask me a question and I give you this sort of high level philosophical sort of impact level response, it's not that I gave you a wrong answer. I just didn't give you the answer that's going to be most helpful for you. And that's why you walk away frustrated and you're like, I'm not going to go to Alex unless I absolutely have to. Once I realize, oh, Andrew just needs information presented in this way. So if I can make
Yeah.
sure that I'm targeting that, he's going to feel more confident about what he's doing. He's going to trust me more. He'll then invest the time to answer my questions, hopefully in the way that's most helpful to me. And that's a pretty small thing. That's not changing who you are. It's just being more attuned to what other people need.
Yeah.
And that's really what has to happen at work for
Mm.
anything to get done.
Absolutely. And we often see workplaces have one approach to internal communication. And I, it's just a nonsense, isn't it? If you're in a company, my last big company was like 50,000 people. And then here's one communication that's going to go to all of them, and they'll all receive it, understand it, and act in the same way afterwards. How's that going to work then? It just, and we had issues of that where people didn't have corporate laptops, didn't have phones that you can access the links on, all those sort of things. You think, well, okay, what are we trying to get across then? Yes, the message is super important, but how we get the message across is the valuable thing. Because if we don't get it across, if we don't help people see how this is going to change what they do, change the behavior, and the benefits and positives is going to be this, it's super hard, really. And do you find, obviously, we're in a bit of a interesting time since the pandemic. We all worked out of the office. Then there was a desire to go back to the office, and so then we have some companies working hybrid. Some people in the office 1 day a week, some 3 days a week. Some companies are mandated a complete return to the office. And one of the things I noticed in corporate life is that there wasn't training, education, guidance as to how to manage, lead, inspire teams that you might not see versus teams that you see all the time. So how do you manage across? Is that something that you come across? Trying to
Yeah.
manage people that are hybrid and remote and or in the office all the time. How do leaders and managers cope with that structure?
Yeah, there's so many elements of it. I mean,
Mm.
one is whatever medium you're working together through, there's pros and cons to just the communication channels that are
Yeah.
available. Um, if it's a distributed team and people are never in the same place, and maybe they're all over the world, and so a lot of their communication is asynchronous because
Mhm.
it's nighttime and daytime for people. And so if you're just doing that, well, how do you make the best use of that asynchronous communication? Because that's just literally the words you're putting down. You can't and understand connotation. There's nothing about tone. There's not back and forth for clarity. So that's a very different way of communicating and way of thinking about, like, what are we putting out and how do we give people a chance to engage? How do we make sure that they understand? Then if you are seeing people even one day a week in person and can have that back and forth, or you
Yeah.
are having those Zooms. So a lot of it is looking at what are the communication channels that you can use, and are you using them strategically, um, based on how you're working.
Mm.
Um, but then also recognizing that, especially when people aren't physically in the same place, when you're physically in the same place, you can have those aside conversations if you're sitting next to someone in a meeting, or you happen to walk by each other in the hallway and you have a chat. So there's room for relationships to form, because people aren't just interacting about the work. But that's much harder.
Yeah.
In fact, it's pretty much impossible if you don't make time for it. And so if you have leaders that are like, I really want there to be a culture, I want people to feel comfortable coming to me or going to each other, you have to build in time and structured opportunities for those relationships to form. And that's a lot of the stuff that we're doing is, what's this outcome you want, and how can we help you deliberately create opportunities for that to happen, and take people through that process.
Because I think one of the things that businesses don't often do is to ask their teams, whether they spread globally or nationwide, how they feel about the communication they receive, or how do you make you feel? What did you change? And I had a big global team, and you send something out, and then somebody in Australia will read it immediately and respond straight away, and now have a dialogue with them. But then somebody in America won't read it for another 9 hours. And so do they feel left behind, or vice versa? Do they feel they're not as involved in the discussion? So absolutely. So yes, when you press send or you leave the voicemail, then you just don't know where the person picks the message up, what their mindset is, any of those things. And yeah, you just sort of hit send and think, well, that's it now. But that's just the start of it, really. You've got to understand, how is it moving you closer to your primary objectives, whatever they might be. And if you found that companies reach out to you with similar problems, have they changed over the last couple of years, or is it rooted in relationships, connections, understanding?
Yeah, we've only been around. We formed a side project before, but as a company in mid 2021. So
Mhm.
in sort of pandemic era, and it had been a side project. But once we realized, okay, the this remote and hybrid is only going to accelerate it. It's not going to go away,
Yeah.
and people are feeling so isolated, and all of these challenges, engagement and retention issues have come up. There's a real opportunity. Um, so initially, it was a lot of that, like, how do we rebuild that sense of culture or maintain it, because we're not going to all be working in the same office, all the time going forward. And that's still a common thread, but
Mhm.
now they'll be more specific. Okay, we, not only do we want to cultivate that type of culture, but we also need these two teams to work together better. Or we need the people that are now in management positions haven't had any training
Yeah.
in the human management side, and so we want them um, to feel more comfortable using these skills, or tuning in their, or like fine tuning their emotional intelligence, or communicating expectations. So we're getting more requests for very specific scenarios.
Which I think is good. Is a really good sign. I've long held the view that and this is going to sound old, but let me finish it. So we tend to promote people that are good at their jobs, which you think, well, that makes sense. But we promote the person that's an amazing salesperson. We promote the person that's an amazing marketing person. What we don't then help them to do is to figure out how to lead a group of people, because the person that's a salesperson, she or he might love the selling side, love business development. They don't want people. They don't want to manage people. And I think there's almost that, well, you've been promoted, you've got to have a team of people. And we sort of we punish the people that they're managing, and we punish a person that's been asked to manage. So yeah, companies don't spend enough time figuring out how to help people redefine the relationships and how
Yeah.
to guide people. And I think, yeah, if you're being asked that question, that shows companies at least are understanding it, and yeah, it's a huge responsibility for you, I guess, to get that right, because that's so important. And
Yeah.
isn't it saying that people leave a business because of the manager, they stay with the business because of the manager. So if you don't have a good manager or a good leader, you're far more likely to leave, and that's a big cost to the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Manager, and also one of the other huge indicators of performance and tenure is, someone have a friend at work? And
Yeah.
so both of those are 100% relational. It's not about, you know, is there really good coffee or are they giving snacks in the room? It's not, are you doing happy hours? It's not like, how much are your bonuses? It's, do I feel like I can be a human, and that I'm supported for the human that I am, and I connect with people. And
Mm,
I think that's so telling. Is like, that's really where the solutions need to be, not adding these superficial perks. And I think that the problem, I mean, the problem that you described of people being promoted because they were good at one thing, but that once you get into any type of manager role, it's a totally different skill set. That, I think that's probably one of the biggest contributors to why so many people are miserable at work. Because if you have a boss who doesn't want to be a boss, you know that they don't want to. You know that 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 they're not
yeah.
happy. They're not giving you what you need to perform your best. And the ripple of the effects of that are just huge. And so I think interpersonal skills for everybody, but especially for people who are in any type of management position, need to be a much higher priority for
Mm.
companies.
And absolutely. I mean, I've had friends, known people that haven't had an annual review for 5 years. That every meeting they have with the manager is always cancelled, and they just think, okay, well, I can just keep going and get paid, and it's as soon as I get something better, I'll leave. But I was lucky in a way. I think that I loved managing people. I loved it. It was
Same.
incredibly difficult in the best possible way. There's some really bad times, great times, but the thought that, gosh, I'm helping nurture, develop, notice these people. I loved it, but so a lot of that was without formal training. It was just the fact that I think I had an affinity with it, and I think people don't necessarily respect the role of a good manager as much as they should do, really, and that people don't understand almost what the dynamics like, because you do spend a lot of time with these people and you want to understand what's the relationship, what's the dynamic, what are we getting from each other, how can you help me, how can I help you, all of those things. So I think that's a really good place to focus. I totally agree. Well, and one of the things I think that makes it even more challenging today, and this is unlike any other time really. So when I started work, um, there wasn't the internet, there weren't laptops, certainly weren't smartphones, no social media. So we just write everything by hand. Faxes were, gosh, a work of mystery, and they're amazing things. You put a piece of paper in it, it comes anyway. Wow, but that was as good as you got, really. So whereas we have people that are coming to work now that have never known life without access to a smartphone, have never had to go to the library to check out the one book on Egyptology to finish a project at school. They just Google it, and then you have people like me that didn't use computers at all when I started work. So how do you help businesses integrate those different profiles? That's quite a different experience. It's unlike anything we've had before. We've not had this massive surge of computing power, smartphones, AI. The answers everywhere, versus those that it was in a book. If it wasn't in a book, that was it, really.
Yeah, I think it's cultivating that sense of curiosity and recognition that it's so easy to assume everybody else thinks exactly the same we do. Everybody understands technology the same way that we do. Um, but our lives are so busy, and even more so now that we have smartphones. Like, we can't sit for 5 minutes with our own thoughts. We have to
Yeah.
a game, or find an article, or doom scroll on social media. Um, so to just create those opportunities to just notice, oh, my assumptions are shaped by these things in my experience, and they're particular to me, um, or or people of my generation. This is how other people think, and opportunities to really understand that. That's something that play does so well, is because
Mm.
you're all going through the same experience, but individually experience it in different ways, and making that space to talk about it and say, wow, I've been putting all my things in the chat. Andrew, I noticed you don't use the chat at all. You are much more likely to just speak out loud on Zoom. Why is that? You might find the chat really, really distracting.
Mhm.
It's too many communication channels at the same time. And so once you can understand why people communicate the way they do or think the way that they do, then you've opened yourself up a little bit, and there's room to adapt, and there's more willingness to find some sort of common ground and to advocate for yourself. I mean, the number of times I've heard people complain like, oh, I'm never, in meetings, they just tell us all the stuff, but they never send a list of bullet points afterwards. There's no agenda. Well, some people need to see things in writing. So advocate for yourself. You can complain about it, but if this is an ongoing problem, if you're not articulating what your needs are and making the case that that's going to help everybody in the long run, that's really something you can do. You can't just complain that you're a victim of your needs not being met if you're not telling people what those needs are.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a two-way thing, isn't it? We can't always expect the business or our managers to have all the answers and to come to us, well, here's what you get. Because they might, oh, that's a great idea. Why haven't we sent out bullet points before? Yeah, do you want to manage that? Absolutely. It can't just be I'll just sit here and wait for the higher ups to fix this. Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they're so busy doing other things, they don't know what needs fixing. And they haven't thought of a solution that could be relatively simple.
Yeah. One of the most powerful questions that we often do at the end of a game session is based on what just happened, what thoughts that you had. Think about you're writing an instruction manual for how to work with you. What is one thing that if your team members knew about you would help you? And it can be little things like I need to see things in writing, or I don't like to be like if you come to me with a really big important question and need an answer right away, that just freaks me out because I need some time to process things.
Mhm.
Or you don't need to sugarcoat feedback. Just tell me exactly what I need to know, and in a succinct way, because I get stressed when something's drawn out over long periods of time. These are not rocket science. These are little things. But if you don't tell people about that, they're always going to be triggering your pet peeves because they don't know any different. And it's such a powerful question. And you can see these light bulbs going off and these
Yeah.
opportunities to make everyday interactions much more successful and positive.
Mm. Yeah, I think sometimes people think that the answer is such a complicated process and it's so complex and it's almost you can't even put the energy into thinking about it. Whereas quite often it's quite simple, really. And it sounds as simple as it is about communicating better. And you can say that, well, communicate better. You can't leave it there. Obviously, you guys don't leave it there. You explain how to communicate and explain what the benefits of things are. Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's not having a complicated answer. It's about having something that has stickability, if that's such a word, and that people can embrace. Yeah, we can do these things. These aren't too complicated. Yeah, why haven't we thought of these before? Those are the things.
Mm-hmm.
Not that super complicated 1,000-page McKinsey deck that they hand over at the end of a project saying, "Hey, you do this," but nobody ever looks at. You want the things that are
Yeah.
practical.
And there's 2 points of it. Like the first one is obviously recognizing those things that we can do differently, and why it's so important, and opening up your mind.
Hmm.
But then you're even more likely to get that behavior change and have it be sustainable if you then give an opportunity to practice that. It's one
Yes.
thing to know I need to communicate differently. Andrew understands information this way. It's another to make that my default when you ask
Mhm.
me something so that I do that. So practice it. And that's another reason why games are so great is because you're giving this opportunity where there's no stakes. It's not like a client deadline is going to be missed, or, somebody's going to be made to look stupid if they don't know the answer because it's the context of a game, but it's a way to practice doing that. So then when you get into the real world and that scenario comes up, you already feel comfortable. You already know
Mm.
how to do it and sort of have some of those neural pathways in place.
Mm. This this next question might sound like I'm trying to create more work for you, so don't take it the wrong way. But one of the things I've noticed that we have a massive almost stagnation in is how we recruit people to join a business. And yes, I know we have AI now that sort of scans CVs or resumes and scans everything. Like a lot of the time, it's AI to AI for the first sort of 3 rounds of an interview, really. But looking at your story and your ethos and the way you think, your philosophy seems very attuned to not only how do people within a business better understand one another, how do they engage with one another, but almost a step before that. So how and could you help businesses with how they recruit people to come into the business? So because yes, you are recruiting an individual, but like with any sports team, you don't want 2 Michael Jordans in the same sports team. You don't want 2 Wayne Gretzky's. You don't want 2 Tom Brady's. You have to figure out how the balance works and whether someone is going to come in and upset the balance of the team. And I wondered if you again, I'm not trying to create a great word for you, but I wonder if you thought about that, because it really feels that that's a big part that we need to get our heads around as well. How do we recruit the right people, not just the person that fills that job description?
Yeah, this is sort of a controversial take because this is something I thought a lot about. I think it is terrible to be using AI in the recruiting and hiring
Yep.
process because, I mean, look at the people that you choose to have in your life, your spouse and your friends. You didn't just pick them at random. You didn't just look at keyword. I mean, if anybody's been on online dating, you can see you match up with certain people and you meet in person and you're like, oh gosh, no. There's a lot of nuance between humans and there's certain chemistry and you can't get that from keywords. And what happens so much now is people just write their resumes, or if they're doing this, what I think is so horrible is the interview where it's like a video interview and it's just AI evaluating it. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
imagine something feeling more dehumanizing, but you can target what you say because you know what keywords are looking for. So that's nothing about you, nothing about your values or your priorities or how you answer questions, how you communicate. And and that's really ultimately what leads to success. I've seen so many examples of a hiring through an algorithm or even going through a recruiter firm that's really just matching for
Mm.
keywords and it's not a good fit. And so when you the biggest thing that I advocate is when it comes to any human to human thing, there aren't shortcuts. You can't you can't strip away the emotional and humanity stuff because that's what's going to ultimately lead to success or failure. You have to invest in that. So I think with recruiting, a lot more needs to be done to think about what is the culture? Who does this type
Yeah.
of culture resonate with? And that's not to say it's good or bad or says anything about your intelligence or your performance, but if you're a really competitive person, it's probably not a great fit for you to work somewhere that's not super competitive. And that's not anybody's fault. That's not a bad thing. But there's certain characteristics and personality traits among both people and organizations that have to be a fit.
I fully agree with the AI keywords thing. And almost one of the surefire ways I know somebody isn't gonna work is when I'm told by somebody from the recruitment team or wherever, oh, this is the on paper, this is the perfect person. I think, well, then I don't even need to see them because they're not going to be, because I just know they're not. And so much of it still is about having that conversation and discussion. And I think it's hard now because as somebody looking for a role, you put your stuff through your eyes, you tick the boxes that you know they're going to respond to, and you go backwards and forwards. Exactly as you say, same as on whether it's a friend on social media or it's somebody on Tinder or Bumble or wherever else, and you sort of they're taking the right words. They want long walks on the beach, must love dogs, and you think, well, yeah, that's gonna get what I want. It's crazy that we use it in that way. One of the things that I noticed, and take this in the spirit it's meant. Sounds like a terrible warning now. When I've read your writing and sort of read some of the things you've communicated, and now just talks, you come across as a very resilient, determined, engaging, and I think passionate individual. Do you think that's a fair description?
Yeah, and it's there's risks to
Yep.
that. There's certainly times where I show up and I'm really excited and I want to, I always have a game in my purse because it's like, let's do something fun, let's get to the meat of things. And sometimes that's not received well. Um, And my first thought is to take it personally, but then I have to think, you know what, like maybe this just isn't the right networking group for me, or maybe these people, they're not ready. They don't come from an environment where it's normal to think about, bringing joy and connection into work. Um, but for me, it it helps me find the environments and the people that are, you know, that I do have that affinity with easier because I'm putting myself out there.
Hmm. And you mentioned the word joy there. So where does your personal joy come from? What makes you happy?
Spending time with people, and not only the people that I already know and love, but I get so excited when I meet somebody and you can just tell you have the worldview or your passions are
Yeah.
aligned. I think that's so exciting and feels so validating. Um, I still take dance class every week, and that's something that brings me so much joy and lets me use my brain and body in a really different way. And um, that's almost like therapy to me. Um, my husband and my dog bring me a lot of joy, just hanging out at home and being able to recharge. Um, I think other than dance, the most of the things that bring me joy are people
Yeah.
related, which is funny. I'm a very social person, but I'm introverted. Um,
So is your household one of those that plays lots of games at Christmas? You just sort of whip out a game. We're going to play a quick game as a family game or Thanksgiving.
Yes. Well, and it's funny, my in-laws are very game people. Way more than my family. My mother's not a game person at
Mhm.
all. But my brother is, and his kids, my niece and nephews, they're big game people. So we always play a lot of games. And it's something I learned about myself a couple of years ago, um, is there's I don't like games where there's an element of deception or when it's really highly competitive and individualistic, because what I value about that time is that time to get to know each other better and have that shared experience. So when it is pitting people against each other or when people are not being authentic, it's too stressful for me. So I've had to look at, well, what types of games are fun for me and what types of games are not. And if a game's not fun, if it makes me stressed, it's not worth engaging in. 'Cause that's
Mhm.
not why you play games in for fun. And when you're using it for work purposes, I think sometimes it's important to create that discomfort to explore it. But
I must admit I'm better than I used to be with games. I I didn't like losing for, for quite a while, but I'm the same as you now. So I found games where that doesn't really matter. But almost the game is secondary to the discussion of the bit. And I don't like games that are too complicated. When I get a game and it's
Mhm.
the booklet of instructions is literally 100 pages long, it's like no, I want it to be simple. I want to understand this in a few seconds. One of the games that we used to play, I used to play sort of charades quite a lot at sort of Christmas, so guessing. But my nobody will play with my wife and I. We'll sort of describe. We'll do like a couple of things, and we guess it. Just seem to guess it straight away. You can in tune, and you just know you're thinking about certain things and how you must have read the cards before. You must have seen this already. So no, so we're banned from playing charades. But yeah, other games yeah. Actually,
Yeah,
I made a game a couple of years ago for a Harry Potter game for my children. Gave it to them for Christmas, and we loved it. Just yeah, 'cause I knew what they enjoyed and how they enjoyed it and
uh-huh.
stuff. It was fabulous. I loved doing that. Yeah, a board game. Yeah, it was great. But I agree. I think games are in the right place at the right time. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really so in addition to the facilitation side, the other thing that we do is we train other facilitators and trainers and instructional designers how to incorporate play and how to pick the right game and set up the game
Mhm.
for the scenario. Because if you have a team of people, they don't trust each other, they've just been through some big change, you don't want to bring a very competitive game, or a game that's really heavily strategy. You want it to be more about them spending time together. And so that's what we've tried to do is build a bunch of frameworks and tools for looking at the mechanics and dynamics inherent within a game with
Mhm.
the outcomes or the conversations you're trying to get so that you're sort of creating that experience that's going to go the direction that you want it to. And so I use that so much now in my personal life too, is when I think about what game am I going to bring, to Christmas with my in-laws. It's like, oh, I think this would be really good because it would get people thinking in this way. And,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not going to bring this game because these two people would get too competitive and these two people would get too angry.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's changed over my lifetime, and I guess a little bit of yours, is that people we seem to have got into that sort of comparison culture where we look at other people, look at other people's lives or the lives they portray on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and we think, "Wow, this is amazing! This is the life I want to lead." Then we look to others to externally validate us, so whether it's likes, comments, shares, whatever. And I sometimes think we would be better off if we recognise that loving ourselves is probably the most important thing we can do. And it might sound a bit wishy-washy now, but the reason I'm saying is that if we don't invest in ourselves, then we're not going to have the energy to help other people. We're not going to have the capacity, the love, or the thoughtfulness, whatever, to actually, because we're too down on ourselves. Yeah, I just wondered if you agree.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that again, we're, in any game session that we're doing, we bring in that element of self-awareness of what is this bringing up for you? Are you having fun? What characteristics of this situation are making it fun? Is it the way that the game is making you think? Is it the
Mhm.
particular people that you're with? Is it that you were already in a good mood to begin with? Because you didn't have, a stressful thing happen this morning. But just how do you be more attuned to that so that you can make decisions to, avoid situations that are going to trigger the negative pieces and go towards situations and opportunities that are going to bring out the positive.
Hmm. And just the link to that, then. So how do you practice self care? What do you, apart from dancing, what do you do to look after yourself to make sure your energy levels, emotional and sort of physical, remain high?
Yeah, I tend to get really excited at different opportunities and before would just jump at something that sounded fun or interesting, but now I've learned to be a lot more discriminate and think about sort of in the long run.
Mhm.
um, is it just that I want to learn more about it, but I don't actually want to have to put in a lot of effort? Am I just curious, or is this something that's going to be really meaningful and, there'll be some sort of value to me at the end? So taking that time to make sure that the decisions that I make, for what to spend my time in or, who to build relationships with is for, I guess, not to sound like I'm on a reality show, but for the right reasons.
Hmm.
And ultimately going to be good in the long run. I've had to say no to a lot of things, and just recognize this isn't going to be a great fit. Or I think once the initial curiosity wears off, this isn't really a group I want to spend time with, not because they're bad or anything, just because of that fit issue.
Because ultimately there are only 24 hours in a day. It's the one thing we can't make more of, and it's probably the most valuable asset we have, really. So, yeah, you deciding that you want to become a tuba player, or do I spend more hours doing this, or do I spend more hours dancing? Well, I know which one I love, and I don't think I'm going to get enough out of the other one to make it worthwhile. So, yeah, I think it is selfish, but I think in a good way that we know what works for us. And yeah, and like you say, it is important to try new things, absolutely. But it's a case of recognizing when actually, no, yoga is just not for me. Or it's just not. I can do this, and I'll do Pilates, or I'll do whatever. But actually, I can't do that one. That's
Yeah.
selfish. I
And
can't do that.
I also have learned several times through experiences, once I feel like I'm stretched too thin, I start to resent everything that I'm doing. And the things that
Yeah,
previously brought me a lot of joy don't, because it feels like an obligation. And, I have to think about that time too. If I'm spending time doing this, I'm not spending time
yeah.
doing this.
Mm,
And that is not fun or replenishing for me at all.
no. So if someone asks, as I am, what is it like being you? How do you answer that?
It's exhausting because I overthink things. Like I have a pretty good sense of intuition, but I also want to make sure that I'm not overlooking any important pieces of information. So I tend to be an overthinker, over planner, over preparer. And so most of the decisions that I make are good, but the process of making them uh, takes a lot out of me too. It's something I'm constantly trying to work on.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's the same within business. That's often you think, well, I just make a quick decision. If it doesn't work, we'll change it. But I'm sure you had in corporate life, you go to things. How can it take 8 weeks to get this through? We could have done it, tested it, trialed it, and moved on to the next thing by now. But yeah, there are those committees. It almost sounds like a committee in your head, I guess. You want all the rational information, you want all the information, but there's always going to be more information. It's just, do you have enough information to make a decision? Yeah, okay, and yeah, absolutely. I'm better now at making quick. It's not necessarily to say that they're better decisions; they're just quicker. So,
Hmm.
and I think, well, and generally, nothing's forever, so you can
Right.
change stuff really. So you're building out a business, you're dancing, you're with the dog, you're with your partner, with the family. What is the? Can you say what the future holds? What are the things that you aspire to do in the next few years?
We're sort of at this point with Barometer where we've created, we have our products and services and our approach, and we've validated that it works. And now it's like, is there enough demand in the market for it on
Mhm.
both the training side and my next couple of years are just 100% focused to like, can we make this happen? I feel like if we quit too soon, I'll always regret it.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to stick with something for too long if all the signs are there. So I try not to think too far ahead and just
Mhm.
focus on this, the next couple of years is I believe so strongly in what we're doing, and that there's so much benefit that can come from playing more and connecting more and helping people understand themselves more and understand their relationship to work and their colleagues.
Mm.
Uh, and so really just trying to do everything that we can to make that happen. And if it works, great. If not, at least we'll know that we did everything, and be able to figure out what my next big thing will be.
I think the to me the biggest thing you've done, which makes me convinced of its longevity, is you. I said earlier on, you really understood the questions that need to be answered, and yes, you'll always need to fine tune the answers. Whether you've got it exactly right now, or is shift this, change that, move this around, try this, test this, of course. But the hardest thing for most companies is figuring out what questions are we answering, and you're not trying to answer everything. You've got a really clear focus on here are the questions that you answer. If these questions are answered, your business will be happier, more successful, and will engage its employees and clients in a way it hasn't before. That's a massive thing to get the answer to. So I think, yeah, fine tune the deliverables, absolutely. But I think really, yeah, sticking to the fact you've got the right questions. Yeah,
Yeah, and really what we're trying to get people to do is to engage with those questions, and to,
yeah.
as uncomfortable as the uncertainty is, you
Mhm.
can't get to satisfaction and resolution if you don't go through that uncertainty. And
You you don't achieve what you could achieve. It's not saying that businesses can't be successful; they can be, but I don't think businesses don't. They might say they do, but they don't want to try something and fail. They don't want to sort of. They say, "Oh, we like to fail because we great." No, you don't. But it's yeah. You could be so much more by making some relatively small changes, and yeah, you got to shout about it. And hopefully people will listen to this. I put lots of links into the notes. You got some really great stuff on the website. You do some really good writing as well. So I'd certainly encourage people to look at that and just explore how there's a different way to answer the questions that are really important.
yeah,
Uh,
and we do just about every month a virtual game session because we love just taking people through this experience and so showing them what we do, but also opening up some of those questions that are going to be helpful for them to think about. So definitely encourage people to check out our virtual game events.
I'll be at the next one.
I'll
If you
send you the
this
link.
really, really competitive English guy in the background, yeah, that'll be me. I just want to thank you so much for your time. We covered lots of topics. I think there wasn't anything we talked about that wasn't important. And I think you're incredibly interesting and I've got a passion for the right things in life. So, yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This is great.